Before we get started with today's episode, I wanted to provide a quick disclaimer that this episode features some very serious topics, which include substance abuse, self harm, and the death of a child. Although this content may be difficult for some, we hope you'll listen as today's guest message is one of hope and is transformative for those who hear it. And with that, we'll get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Between Two Studs. I'm Alex Studd.
And I'm Ron Studd.
And Ron, for episode 59, we are joined by Mr. T.R. Sherlock from Olean, New York. How are you doing,
Woo!
T.R.?
I'm good. How are you?
Fabulous. I was actually just thinking, Ron, we've done 50. This is our 59th episode.
Mm-hmm.
We've done a whole bunch of episodes with people with Western New York connections. But I think this is the first time we've recorded an episode with the guest being in Olean. I think so.
I think you're right. You're right.
TR, thank you.
Yes.
Glad I could be of service.
Well, we're happy to have you. So one of the things about you, Tim, is that you and I go back. We went to school together. And one of the reasons why you're here today is we're going to talk a little bit about a book that you've written. And I have to say, before we get started, that is an incredible book. It will really, I think, shake you up as a person if you have a heart. But it's so worth it. And so one of the things that I really wanted to do was to have Tim or TR on to really kind of talk about this book and to really kind of get that message out there. So we're excited to have you on. But one of the things that we do for all of our guests is to really kind of offer up a toast. Our sponsor, Malort, is we always try to give one to our guests. So this is for you, sir, and for
you and to the
and
official spirit
host.
of Between Two Studs.
Right.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So, as Ron said, this episode, compared to maybe some of our other episodes, we're gonna be talking about some serious subject matter. TR, gracious enough to tell us his story, which is an inspiring story, and we're excited to get into it. I do want to call out, on a lighter note, we talked about it off the air, drinking Coca-Cola in Olean, New York. You have to be, I think the last I looked, the population of Olean was about 14,000, so we have at least...
We're less than that now.
Okay, well, whatever we are, you are one of a handful. This is very much Pepsi and pop country.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And Alex was mentioning before we got started with it too, like just to set the scene, you go into a grocery store and you will see displays for Pepsi, Mountain Dew.
The entire row is
everything.
Pepsi products. And then they have maybe 3 inches wide of just enough for maybe one soda can width of Coke products. And I've always, living in Olean, who was that person? Who is there buying Coca-Cola?
Now we know. The mystery has been solved.
Let me ask you, was that always you? Since you were a kid, or it was after you moved to North Carolina, which we'll get into?
Actually, so I never actually moved down there. I never made it there.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
okay.
But it's always been me. I had a stint where I drank Mountain Dew for a period of time. And that stuff was liquid crack. No good.
Yeah.
So always been the Coca-Cola guy. Always.
Yeah. I was going to say, even RC Cola, which, there's people who are big RC Cola fans, but it was I never even remember ever seeing that. It was just Pepsi everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Little tiny Coke, and there was no room for anybody else outside of maybe some of the store brands. So,
I'm an anomaly. It's fine.
All good. All right. So we'll get started with your book. And, I think one of the things that we want to kind of talk about is, so this is a memoir. And I know we've already kind of given a preface that there's a lot of heavy material we're going to be covering here. So I'll probably put just a little disclaimer up so that folks are aware, but we'll get started. So let's start off where, your book starts off with you outlining your upbringing in Western New York, as we're already talking about. And in that beautiful place that Alex and I are from as well, Olean, New York. And so we were in the same grade together, went to Olean High School. And I remember we were in Sunday school together too. And we did
St. John's.
Yep. And then
love it.
We even did theater together, which was a lot of fun.
Yep.
And I think there's even one more connection that we got. So this is more of a recent thing. But you did an interview on WIVB, right?
Yes, I did.
Well, Alex and I've also done an interview on WIVB.
7-year-old this face.
Nice.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
It was
it was the highlight, the peak of our careers. I was 7.
It's only been downhill. But it was
being on the local news, gotta watch 4.
Yeah.
Right. Amen.
Right. But anyway, so we've got a lot of these different connections, but if you wouldn't mind, could you kind of paint the scene for our listeners, what it was like growing up in Olean, and what are some of the things that make it so special?
Oh, Lord. So yeah, like you said, Olean, New York, nestled in pretty much a lovely little valley in the Catskills, or
the Enchanted Hills.
The Enchanted
Mountains.
They always called them the mountains, but I don't know if you had, we had the same teacher, Mrs. Van Scooter for Earth Science, who very quickly corrected and said, if you look at the rock strata, they are not mountains, but hills. So I've always remembered that distinction right there because she scared me to death. It's beautiful. We're nestled right into the heart of it, in a beautiful valley, surrounded on all sides by beautiful nature. So Olean is a quiet city, a small city. At the height of its, grandeur in the 1920s and whatnot, it was actually a very large city, and Al Capone used to bootleg whiskey and spirit through Olean, New York. But small population. It's where you can get. I always say it's big enough that you can get lost, and small enough that you know everybody.
Yep.
Your neighbors are your friends. You all watch out for each other's kids. Growing up back then, we were the generation that we didn't have technology like we do today. So you got on your bike and your parents didn't really care. They kind of get out the house. They closed the door and you were gone. And they said, be home before the lights come on. And you just rode your bikes everywhere. I was raised in a very Orthodox Roman Catholic upbringing, St. John's. Back then, Monsignor Kelly was, I do believe, the father that was there at the time. Very traditional upbringing from a very blue-collar family. My father was a paid firefighter for the city of Olean. My mother put herself through college, working at different donut shops and as a cleaning lady at St. Bonaventure University. Olean for me has always it's been home. It's been safe. It wasn't always the most inviting place, and I talk about that a little bit in the book. Growing up here, it's a very tradish place. It's wonderful for the white picket fence and, the pansy flowers and raise your kids and the 3.4 kids and the dog, which was always an ideal of mine. But it wasn't a mold that I was ever comfortable in or didn't quite fit.
Well, and to paint the picture even further, look up Olean, New York on a map. Anybody? We're not near any major U.S. city. And in fact, Olean is the big city for the surrounding area. I remember, we had family members in Coudersport and Portville, and it was like, oh, we're going to Olean this weekend, right? Olean is the big city, even though it's very tiny. So I can only imagine, and we'll talk about this more, but just setting the stage for everyone, pretty rural, all things considered.
It really is.
Appalachia, and you're going to have with that some traditionally more conservative values.
Oh,
which,
absolutely.
There's good and bad with that, of course.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very rural, but in the same breath, you go an hour and a half, you can get to Buffalo, another hour and 45, you're in Rochester. You want to go about 4 hours, you're in Syracuse, 6 hours, you're in New York City. 3 hours south, you're in Pittsburgh. So really, there were no big cities. Olean was always called the big little city, because we're so tiny. But you're absolutely correct. It's a very traditional, very conservative, small town. And with that,
and everyone's Catholic. I didn't know that until I left. Until I was like, what do you mean there are no Fish Fridays where I live now?
Yeah, everybody's Catholic here. I mean, well, we did have pockets of different religions, very small communities.
Sure.
But, it really was, you're very leave it to beaver mentality around here growing up, I think is the best way to put it. I mean, but it's endearing. It's endearing. I mean, I moved back. I raised my son here, so there are some perks.
Yeah.
So let's go. So you kind of set the level, the level set. You went through grade school here. You were involved, whether you wanted to be or not, with Sunday school. You got involved with the theater. That's how you got to know Ron. Then let's kind of jump forward a little bit. After college, you were married. You became a father. And then, which if I understand correctly, that's something from like the beginning, like from childhood. You were like, I want to be a dad.
God, yeah.
Which I got to say that
I can remember, and my mom.
That's interesting in itself. Yeah. Go. I'm sorry.
Oh, my mother kept the assignment that they do, and I want to say it was like first grade or second grade, and it's what do you want to be when you grow up? And I still have it. I could pull it out, but very distinctly I wrote a dad. I mean, that is honestly all I ever wanted to be was a father. I thought it was the coolest job, get to be a dad. And I really envisioned myself, as hokey as it sounds, I was going to be, the guy out there with the glove mitt, and we were going to pitch in, we were going to, fly kites, and I was going to be that, soapbox derby dad. Yeah, I will tell you right now that is the furthest thing from the truth. You want to watch RuPaul's Drag Race? I'm that dad. But,
there you go.
But at a young age, I wanted to be that dad. I really did.
So let me poke into that a little bit, because I'm really curious, TR. So you knew at a very young age that you wanted to be a father, and did you know at a young age you were also a gay man?
I did. And so much of my upbringing was this, fugue state of the mind, right? Two worlds that were completely diametrically opposed. I knew I was different. Now, as a young man, as a youth, I didn't know what gay was. I didn't know any of that. I just knew I was different. But I knew there was this standard. I wanted to be a dad, and I was raised. Men do this. Men play sports. Men grow up. Men have wives. Men have families. Men provide for those families. There was a very set standard in doing that. And so those two things could not coexist in my world. So I found outlets like theater. I found outlets where on the stage I could be authentically myself, and everybody thought, oh, he's such a great actor. No, I was being me. So that really was my reprieve from the world in which I was living in.
I see. So that was your outlet. And this is particularly so in rural America, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Those two things are even more diametrically opposed in a small town.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So did you, I know you went to school. Did you go to Fredonia? Is that where you went?
So my undergraduate was done in Fredonia. Absolutely. It wasn't supposed to be. Ron probably remembers I was very involved in music and theater and all sorts of things. I danced, I played piano. And so I was supposed to go to Point Park Conservatory of Musical Theater in Pittsburgh. I had a full scholarship. That was I was going to be a Broadway star. And then I had a foot surgery. And unfortunately, there was a lot of complications with that. I didn't walk for almost a year. That was my senior year, so I think you had already left by then. I had to give up the scholarship. So I was like, well, I'll go to Fredonia and I'll study opera performance. And I'll be a music teacher. I lasted in the music program literally 3 weeks and said, I don't want to teach. I don't want to do this. Absolutely not. I was in Intro to Psychology, and I said, oh yeah, I like this.
Yeah.
And so you got a psych degree.
I did. So I got when I graduated Fredonia, I double majored, double minored. So I graduated with my degree in psychology with a focus in clinical psychology, a degree in English, and then I minored in dance and biology.
Wow. Okay, all those made sense. Where did the biology come from?
I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a pediatric psychiatrist.
Wow.
That was my dream.
That's incredible. Okay, so okay. Appreciate the background. I feel like we're just continuing to peel back this onion, because then I feel like I could go down the rabbit hole of like, okay, so
there's a million.
You had this whole idea that you were going to be like a professional performer.
Oh yeah.
And that dream was just completely taken away from you because of an injury when you were 16, 17?
17.
Wow. And how that didn't make you bitter, or did it make you bitter?
No. Surprisingly, I have such a very strong faith. So for me, I've always been the person who says God has a plan, and I have to have faith in that plan. Have I been derailed? Many times in my life. Has my faith been shaken to a point that sometimes I have questioned it beyond all rational sense? Absolutely. But at that point in my life, no. It didn't shake me because I was going to Fredonia for music. So in my mind, I was still logically following that same path. I was just doing in a different avenue of music. I learned very quickly I did not like that avenue.
So you do graduate, 2 degrees, 2 minors. You mentioned you may be thinking about going to medical school at some point, but then you're also having this calling to you still want to be a dad. That was your first goal from the jump. So is it my understanding, not too long after college, you got married and became a father? Is that correct, the timeline?
Absolutely. Or am I wrong? I met my ex-wife. She was a senior, and I was a senior going into my super senior year because I stayed an extra year to finish the extra degrees. So we stayed together, and I graduated, and then we got married in 2008, and Carter came in 2009, and then Kalen came in 2011.
Wow. And so pretty early on, though, there were some challenges with your partner?
There were challenges even before we got married. And in the book, it's kind of my cathartic tell-all, right? My heart breaks for my ex-wife. Now, not getting into everything, it wasn't a great relationship. I entered into the relationship, as I did with all the relationships that were female in my life, for the wrong reasons. I didn't know
I assume she had no idea that you were gay.
No.
Right.
No. And I talk about that in the book. I had one encounter with a gentleman, actually, when I was 17. And I told my mother, and my mom said, we don't put labels out in the world, because once you do, you can't take it back, honey. And this world can be pretty unforgiving. So you really need to make sure. And at that moment,
wow.
I didn't take it as mean. My mother there was not a malice bone in her body. It really was a mother just kind of forewarning. But I shut it down real quick. Okay, these two things cannot exist, right? So every relationship I got into with a woman was never right. There was always something missing.
Do you think, and I'm sorry to interrupt, I'm just so fascinated. I know you said no malice at all, and also keep in mind the context, right? This was 20 years ago, roughly, or more.
More.
Do you think had she been more forthright in saying, you know what, if that was something you enjoy and you want to put a label to it or not, that's your decision, I support you. Do you think that could have changed your trajectory differently, or do you think it wouldn't have made a difference?
I think absolutely. If I'm being honest, to have that support and that freedom to explore and look at that part of my life, it definitely would have changed the path, but I'm glad that it didn't. I'm glad that the warning came that way. I do not regret anything in my past at all. It has shaped who I am today. There have been wonderful lessons to have been learned from all of the very wonderful highs to the very, very lows. So I don't think it would have, I mean, yes, honestly, it would have changed. I probably would have been with more men. But don't worry, I made up for that later in life. But in all honesty, it led me down a different path, and I'm thankful for that. But getting back to your original question, there were many issues in that relationship. I jumped into a relationship because the clock was ticking. You hear women talk about that biological clock. Well, boy, howdy, it was thundering in my ears.
Yeah.
I assume you were only in your mid-20s?
So actually, when we had Carter in 2009, I was 28 when I had my first one.
Okay, so
I actually waited.
You were late 20s. You were getting that pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I was. I knew I did not want to be some decrepit 80-year-old man with a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I had this pressure. And in my mind, it was all the things are going to fall into place. I'm going to have the wife, and I'm going to have the house, and I'm going to have the great job, and everything's going to be wonderful. But our relationship was not wonderful. There was a period of time, absolutely. We got along, and for that first year of our marriage, it was fine. But then, Carter came and things changed, and she and I both changed, and we both drank very heavily. We were college partiers. That's one of the things that drew me to her, was she was the only woman I knew who could drink like I drank. There were other substances involved and things like that. So it was a very toxic relationship. And I knew I wasn't being true to myself. So Carter came along. It was wonderful. Oh, I was in my glory. I was that Martha Stewart dad. I made homemade baby food. I did the diaper changes and the doctor's appointments and drove him up and down the road when he had croup, so the cool air, and I'd stay up all night with him and I'd take him to work. I loved being a dad. I savored every moment of it. But it also put a strain on the relationship. So we were actually not getting along. And I was contemplating the divorce, and surprise, I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And I remember calling my mother. Beth was about 3 months pregnant, and I said, I want a divorce. And my mother, oh, honey, you cannot do that. What will people say? You can't leave a pregnant woman. Okay, I'll stay. And I actually only stayed 3 more months. Beth and I separated when she was 6 months pregnant with Kalen. He was born in 2011. We filed the paperwork in 2011 to start the divorce, and we officially divorced in 2013.
Wow. And I know you go into that a lot more in your book, but there's some particularly really tragic events even concerning Kalen's birth. That, like I said, we'll leave that for the book. But, you mentioned having some substance abuse issues, and I know that a lot of the challenges you had in the relationship really kind of further helped to push that.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I know that it resulted later on, some of those problems would continue to grow, resulting in, even the separation with your children. And then you, for a while, just facing a really particularly tough time, and then eventually finding your way back to recovery as well. Could you kind of talk us through a little bit about that path? And, even I think one of the challenges too is that when somebody is an addict, right, it's tough when you want to help them. They have to help themselves, though. What are some of the things that you kind of faced with that, and what would be your suggestions to others as well?
So you're absolutely correct. No addict is ever going to change unless they want to.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, I never saw my use of drinking or drugs or anything as problematic. I was your functioning, right, addict. Mm-hmm. I got up every day and went to work just fine. I held down very nice, very good jobs. I had a wonderful home. It wasn't until after the separation, when I went from being this full-time dad to the every other weekend dad.
I see.
And that transition, for me particularly, was devastating because my entire identity was built around my children. So when you took them away, I didn't know who I was. And so, for example, they leave on Sunday, right? And I go home, and I talk about it in the book that the silence was deafening.
Mm.
There was no more laughter. There was no crying. There was no give me this or I want or snuggle or, at the time Carter was 2, so there was no more DDs and play with me's and videos. And so I would just use to the point of oblivion. Pass out, get up, go to work. And that became my norm. But again, it
Right.
wasn't a problem because I was still getting up and going to work and I was functioning.
You were still a functional addict, as you said.
I believed I was.
Okay.
But the depression got worse and worse. And in about right around 2012, I remember I had been speaking with another dear friend of ours, Vicky Teachman.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember calling her and just saying, I want to die. If this is what my life's going to be, I'm done. I want to die. And thankfully, she was there and talked me through a lot of things, and my mother, and I moved back home. I needed the support. I was drowning financially between the cost of attorneys, child support, alimony, my habit.
Right.
And your ex-wife, she was staying at the time in Olean?
No. We lived up near Syracuse. We lived in a town called Lyons, New York.
Okay, but you were within relative driving distance of one another, so you could still.
Yeah, so we were an hour. When I moved back to Olean, it was a 2-hour drive.
I see.
Okay.
And so my life then became every other weekend, I would get out of work at 1 or so, and I would drive 2 hours and pick up my kids, and I would drive 2 hours home, back to Olean.
Yep.
I'd have them, get them home, get them ready for bed. Saturday morning we get up, we'd have the most amazing time ever. We'd play, see family, go to bed Saturday night, get up Sunday. By noon, I was driving 2 hours back up to Lyons to drop them off.
Wow.
And then come back home for 2 hours. 2-hour drive back home. And that was my
So
life.
you were getting one weekend every 2 weeks? Is that right? And my ignorance here, why so little? Why was it not a 50-50 situation? Is that just the legal system that we live in?
It is. Unfortunately, times now are very different. But back then, yeah, that's what you were given, was every other weekend until you proved you were worthy enough to have more. And then when I made the choice to move back to Olean 2 hours away, well, that kiboshed my ability to have any more time. Because, what are you going to do? You can't make kids change school districts. There's no way to do shared parenting. There were a lot of things that happened in my divorce that were bitter and brutal and terrible. So I did. I stayed in Olean, and I did that for 2 years, that driving back and forth and working. And I slowly kept slipping further and further.
Well, I was going to say, throughout this process, is there a feeling that there's light at the end of the tunnel? I'd worry that there wouldn't be. And if there isn't, your motivation
for me,
is
my life literally became a cycle of see my kids and I wouldn't drink and I wouldn't use anything, for that weekend. And I would get sometimes extended weeks during the summer or, working it out, but I would be clean then, but then anything to numb and stop the pain, anything. And I started losing jobs and couldn't pay rent. And I bounced around from different apartments and houses. And then I moved in back in with my parents. And then that wasn't, nobody wants to live with their parents in their 30s. So then I'd try to find another apartment. I'd move out. And I was just partying like I was a frat boy. really. And it wasn't until 2014. Now, mind you, I've already had 2 suicide attempts in that time frame as well. I got in trouble with the law, got arrested. I lost my house. My parents finally threw me out and said, no, we're not doing this. My mother's exact words were, I love you too much to watch you die.
Wow.
So I left. And I tried to stay at my aunt's house until she found me on her front porch, completely shit-faced, and said, you got to go. So I spent about a month sleeping in Lincoln Park or underneath the bridge in the little tunnel there, or down by Boardman Park where Olean General Hospital is, up under that bridge. I'd go to Dunkin' Donuts or the other little places and get their reads and get their throw out donuts and stuff from the night before, and that's what I would eat. I was going to meetings. I was going to these things and trying to get clean, but I really wasn't. And at that point, I was hardly seeing the kids at all because my ex had found out I had been in jail.
And at that point, did you lose all custody? I mean, how does that work?
Oh, not yet. No, not yet.
Okay.
So she didn't even file the paperwork. She just knew that I wasn't going to fight her. I wasn't in any place to, So I had been bouncing in and out of jail. I took a plea deal and said, I'll be clean. Just don't throw me in jail. And so they put me on what's called a drug diversion court. With probation, and I thought I was too smart for the system, so I was still using and doing all these things. And it was July 18th, and I said it was the St. John's Festival. Was the last time
the Italian Festival.
Festa Italiana.
Yep, because the next morning I was walking through town, and there was another girl that was in the program with me, stopped me and said, "Oh my God, you look like shit." And I said, I want to die. And she said, really? And I said, I am too afraid to die, and I'm too afraid to live. What the fuck do I do? And she took me, and we went down and spoke with the program person. And for the first time in my life, I don't know why, I said, I need help. And they put me in jail until a rehab bed opened up. And I went from jail to a rehab bed, from a rehab bed to a 6-month stay in a halfway house to independent living until I graduated the program and could be on my own 2 feet.
Wow.
There was lots that happened in that with the boys, but that was my journey from my addiction to finding that recovery.
So how long was this program? At least this part of it. This piece.
So I would say the 2000, it was about 14, 15. So I started into 15. I came out in 2015. So just about a year and a half. I went in the middle of 2013, and I graduated in 2015 was I finally got my first visitation with my kids.
So this entire time you went how long without seeing your kids?
So when I went into jail, I couldn't make phone calls to the kids. And then when I got into rehab, I started calling, and they kept going unanswered. So now this had been 2 months. I hadn't even spoken to my kids. Finally, when I got into the halfway house in October of 2014, I got a phone call from my son that said, hey, it was his birthday. And I said, hey, Carter, happy birthday. He goes, we're on an adventure. And I said, you are? He goes, yeah, we're in North Carolina. I said, you are? I said, what about school? And then my ex got on the phone and she said, oh, well, about that. I said, what are you doing down there? She goes, well, I'm looking at other jobs. I said, when are you coming back? She said, I'm not, and hung up the phone.
Wow. So in your rehab, which I imagine at this point, your only motivation to get clean and to get better is to have that relationship with your kids, at least
Oh, yeah.
largely. And now you're told in the middle of it that, hey, that 2-hour drive that you were thinking that would happen once you get on the other side of this program, it's now going to be in the Carolinas.
It was not even that it was going to be, because after that phone went dead, I remember calling my ex-mother-in-law. My ex-wife didn't even tell her parents she had left. They were
Wow.
driving to her house to drop off birthday presents for the kids and thought that I was being crazy when I said, it's empty. And then she
Yeah.
called me back a half an hour later and said, oh my God, they're gone. So in that time frame, my ex bounced from Maryland to North Carolina to South Carolina, back to North Carolina, until we ultimately found her in South Carolina. Once I pinpointed where she was working, I filed the paperwork to have her come back to New York, because in our divorce, it was clearly written she was not permitted to remove the children from the state of New York. But that judge, in his wisdom, said, well, they've been down there for about a year. I'm not going to make them move back. So sorry.
So even though it was clearly outlined in the divorce settlement, the judge ruled in favor of your ex-wife, saying, well, they made it, they broke the rule a year ago, but I guess since they broke the rule a year ago, we'll just keep letting it happen.
Well, yeah, and partly, I mean, you also got to remember here he's looking at this woman who's a well, known teacher, in South Carolina, and myself, who is living in a halfway house, who's been trying to kick his crack habit. I wasn't exactly the most reputable person either. The judge made the decision he made based off the information. Was it the right decision? Absolutely not. But it was what it was. And I started talking to the kids again. And I would call my kids every day, and I would talk to them all the time. And I fought in court, and finally the judge said, well, fine, she's going to stay down south, but Miss Sherlock, he's going to get every summer, and you're going to provide the transportation.
So every summer, she would have to transport the kids back to Olean or back to Western New York, where you would have full summer access.
Yep. And if she ever came up for a holiday, she had to bring the kids to me anytime she was in New York State. So I did that for the first summer. Was amazing.
So listen, I'm gonna stop you there, and the reason I say that is because I want to make sure that we go to break, we come back, we'll continue this story because it's a fascinating, it's a sad story, but it's a fascinating story. So we're gonna go to break real quick. When we come back, we'll pick it up from exactly where we just left off. We'll be right back.
We hope you're enjoying the show, but wanted to make you aware that if you ever need to reach out to Alex or myself, you can certainly do so by emailing us at between@twostuds.com. And we'd be happy to hear fan mail, or if you want to suggest a guest, we'd be more than happy to entertain that. So hope to hear from you soon. And with that, we'll get right back to the show.
Welcome back to Between Two Studs. We're hanging out with T.R. Sherlock, author of A Song for Kalen. Lessons Learned from the Life and Death of My Son. Sorry, I know we're smiling. That's a very serious title, but it was because I wanted to make sure I got the name of your son correctly.
Right.
Yes.
That's why I paused. So I got that correctly. Glad to hear that. So we're going to get back into this topic. We were having you were giving us a very important part of your life story, and I'm sorry I had to interrupt, but I wanted to make sure we went to break. So you were telling us what ended up happening was the judge made an agreement that you would be able to see your children in the summer.
Yes.
And that worked out for the first year. And that is sort of where we ended it. So
it worked out great. At this point, I had gotten out of the halfway house, and so I was in my own apartment. I lived in a little one-bedroom. When that first summer, we had an air mattress that my mom and dad had gotten me. It was a queen size, like the really nice big ones. I had a love seat that didn't have any legs, a milk crate with a TV on it, and a dining room table and dishes and stuff. That's all we had.
Yeah.
And it was probably like the best summer of our life. We had this great backyard. the kids came up and we built forts. We lived in Wellsville. We would go down to Three River Park and play in the creek, and
Wow.
we walked everywhere because I didn't have a license or a car. We ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. When I say I was poor, I literally did my laundry in the bathtub and wrung it out by hand and hung it on a clothesline. We stayed up all night. We didn't have cable, had nothing. We would watch videos on the DVD player, or actually, I think we had a VCR. We would pull the air mattress into the living room, and we would just camp out in there, and it was wonderful that first summer. And so by the time the second summer came around, and mind you, this is 2017 now, I had made the decision that I wanted to be there with them. So I was going to move to South Carolina.
Wow. So you were gonna pick up your life, move down there for even though you don't know anyone down there, you have it's strictly to be with your kids.
Absolutely. So I had fast forward, that second summer came, and by now I had furniture and my house looked pretty nice, and I was starting to rebuild. And I said to my ex-wife, I want to move there. And I looked and I found some subsidized housing. I put the application in, they accepted it. I stopped my lease on the apartment I was in. I had everything boxed up. The kids they helped me pack that summer.
Wow.
It was so much fun. And they left in August because kids start school sooner down there.
Yep. And
unfortunately, I never made it down. I was supposed to move down in October. Kalen died in September. And life changed very quickly from that point on, of making different decisions and having to really redirect my life once again, and kind of, as I like to say, kind of refresh it and restart it and refocus it and really figure out what direction it was going to go in at that point when Kalen passed away. But those 2 summers were probably the greatest gift I had in all of recovery and all of just that continuous one-on-one time to be a dad, and the beautiful memories that I got, that I have today with banana pancakes and, eating spoonsful of peanut butter and hot air balloons and building forts, and was just an absolute gift during that time.
Yeah.
So obviously you go into much more detail in the book, but you drop your kids off, or you let your kids go back to the Carolinas. School year begins, and you get a phone call at some point in October.
Yeah. So actually in September. So it was September. It was a Friday, and out of the blue, I got a phone call. It was my ex-mother-in-law. My phone was ringing. I was with a group of friends. I was getting ready to do a drag show, actually. By now, I've already come out, and some things have also changed in my life. And I knew instantly it wasn't good. And she said, there's been an accident. But Carter and Beth are fine, but Kalen's in the hospital. And I remember asking the questions, but she couldn't give me any answers. She gave me a phone number and said, here's the number to the hospital. Here's the 5-digit code you have to give them for them to give you information. I've got to go. I'm getting on a plane. Goodbye. So I picked up the phone, called the hospital. That's when I found out that it wasn't a car accident, that in fact Kalen had been shot. And I remember asking the lady, somehow I remained calm for a little bit, and she informed me he had been shot in the head. They didn't have much information. She couldn't give me whether he was brain. She couldn't tell me anything. Told me to call a police investigator, and that's all she could tell me, and hung up the phone. And I go on in detail in the book, but I remember everything just kind of going black. My world completely falling out and going into survivor mode. I knew I had to get down there, and that was my focus. And from that point until not even just the point of when he died, but even for another week after, I was just literally, what's the next task? What's the next task? I just kept driving myself forward with whatever the next task was. So first it was get down there. Then it was, okay, he's definitely going to die. We have to pull the plug. Well, now the next task was signing the papers, making him an organ donor. Then the next task was speak to the investigator. Then it was go see Carter. Then it was go to the funeral home and make arrangements for the body, go speak to the investigator, go to court because there was a court hearing because they had placed Carter into foster care down in South Carolina. So get everything ready and have all the paperwork overnighted to South Carolina. So I had it ready for court and go to court. And then my entire life became the next step.
And
as a way of
in
functioning.
hindsight, was it helpful in that it kept you distracted, or was it preventing you from really comprehending or facing what was really occurring?
Understanding it now, looking back, right, it makes more sense to me. I was not consciously making these decisions. It was 100% survival.
Yeah.
My body knew that if I were to dwell in that place, I would have fractured irreparably. And I didn't have to focus on my grief because I was too busy solving problems. There wasn't a moment for me to break. I did not have that choice. And so I deflected my grief by taking care of Carter, by taking care of these things. Was that a good thing? Not really, because in the book I talk about it. It was almost a couple years later. I had a complete mental breakdown.
Yeah.
To the point
because of what had happened years before that
because
you
I had never dealt with it.
Faced it. Yeah,
exactly.
I was going to say, you talk about it in the book, but it's like there was like two polar opposites of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, the nurse, I forget her name, was it Rose or
Rachel?
Rachel. I know it started with an R. Rachel she was an angel.
Yes, she was.
And, obviously I'd say read the book to learn more about that. But you were also then on the other side of it, dealing with paternity issues, even whether or not you're even the biological father, trying to battle the South Carolina court system. Like at one point they were giving him grief over the fact that he didn't show up in a suit because he didn't have it, right? After coming down for what had happened.
Right.
And they were giving him grief about that.
Because I wasn't appropriately dressed for court. And I went toe-to-toe with a security guard, and I was none too nice to him, screaming obscenities and telling him, listen, I just literally just pronounced my son dead, and we're going to squabble about the fact that I have flip-flops and not dress shoes on. Like, get the hell out of my way.
Right.
And I just stormed by him. I was like, if the judge has an issue, I'm going, so try to stop me. And as awful as it sounds, as soon as I said my son died, they parted like the Red Sea. Nobody wanted to touch that, and I did. The judge was not going to they refused to give me Carter out of foster care because how did they know I was who I said I was? Because my ex-wife had pretty much told everybody I was dead. I did not exist.
She told people you were dead.
Her exact words were, he's not around anymore. So everybody inferred that I was dead.
Sure. Or you were a deadbeat who had no interest in the child.
Yeah, nobody knew who I was in South Carolina. They weren't even aware. When I finally called the CPS worker and said, I'd like to talk, we didn't even know you existed. The investigator didn't even know I existed. And I think the thing that irritated me the most is here's Carter, okay, who comes running up to me, Dad, Dee Dee. And they're still questioning whether or not I'm his father. That blew my mind, right? And I'll never forget leaving that courthouse in South Carolina, the judge looking at me and saying, well, Mr. Sherlock, welcome to the South. We have a way of doing things down here.
Wow.
I did storm out of that courtroom, and I'm surprised I didn't get arrested. But I remember saying to powers that be down there, well, I'm from New York and we have a way of doing things as well. I still hold the record now for the quickest turnaround. Normally, you don't get a child out of foster care for at least 6 months. I got Carter out in 1 week.
Wow.
One
Well,
week.
and if you don't mind, let's set that up a little bit, right? So, here Tim was down there, and you talk about it a lot in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
The concern was immediately, he had already lost one son. The last thing he wanted was anything else to happen to Carter, right?
Yeah.
And, there's that discussion too where, you're playing Battleship with Carter.
Yes. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you really are saying to him, you're going to come with me. We're going to be good. And, the foster care system down there was basically fighting really hard back against you.
Yeah.
And saying, you have no right. And so, and then you had this really, really just, it was tearful reading it, where you're saying to Carter kind of like, well, when are you coming back, Dad? And you didn't have an answer. You just said, I'm going to try to call you every night.
It was hard because when you put in context, Carter and Kalen are 2 years, 5 days, and 6 hours to the hour apart.
Wow.
They both were 21 inches. Carter was 21 and a half. Kalen was 21 and a quarter. Carter weighed 6 pounds, 7 ounces. Kalen weighed 6 pounds, 7.5 ounces.
Wow. Practically twins.
Yes. And they were incredibly close. Yeah. Up until the night that Kalen died, they shared a bed. They never slept apart. And for whatever reason that night, Carter had relayed this to me later on, had said, no, I'm going to sleep by myself tonight. I'm a big boy. You need to sleep in your own room. And thank God, I hate saying this, but thank God, because had they not, I would have lost both of them. That bullet would have gone through both their heads. So here I'm having to have these conversations with Carter. How do you tell your child that his brother may not come out of this? At first, when he first visited Kalen, then, Kalen dies. How do you tell your son that your other son has died? And trying to find reassurance because, I didn't want to leave him in South Carolina because who was there? The boyfriend had already been arrested. My ex-wife was in the process of being investigated as, part of this, which we later found out she was charged as well to the facilitation of this crime.
Well, and I did want to say, because I don't think we mentioned this, and of course it's all in the book.
It is.
But it was your ex-wife's boyfriend.
Yes.
That was who shot the gun.
Yes. And she was found culpable for many reasons, purchasing the guns and the bullets and things like that. So, we get to this fast forward. Only reassurance I had was, don't worry, buddy. I'm never going to leave you.
Either.
I'm always going to be there. Daddy's not going anywhere. And at the time it was, I'm going to bring you home with me, right? You're going to come home. It's all going to be okay. And what Ron's talking about is the game of Battleship. That's how I ended up telling Carter that Kalen had died. And when it clicked, all Carter said was, can we just play Battleship? Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Wow.
Like he couldn't process it. So when Monday came for court, I went in there. I had birth certificates, my driver's license. I had everything. I did not foresee them saying, oh, no. So then I had to turn around and go back to this kid who lost his home, is staying in a foster home, lost his brother, cannot have contact with his mom without it being supervised. And I have to say, I have to leave. I'm sorry, but I'll be back. And I knew my word had to be my bond. He had lost enough. And so the battle began. And literally, I came back and I was right into the court system, and I had an amazing attorney and an amazing judge. And bada bing, bada boom. It was a Wednesday, and they said, nope, called South Carolina courts and said, oh, you will return this child, and you will do it by next. And he said, when can you go down? I said, Monday. He said, well, he'll be down there Monday. I had Kalen's funeral on Saturday, and Monday morning I was in South Carolina picking up Carter.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, and you had fun too, telling who was the head of the foster system now? It was
the commissioner of social services.
Yeah, because he was giving you a whole no. This is the South. This is how things are done.
Mm-hmm.
You go back up, Yankee. You don't know what you're talking about. And
oh yeah,
and you fought him, but man,
I pretty much told him that if anything happened while I was away, that I was going to pretty much hunt him down. I would make him pay if anything happened to my son. Wow. You know, there are moments in the book where I laugh now. I wasn't very proud about how I handled some things, but you know, sometimes you got to be a Papa Bear.
Well, and as a father who's going through it and is grieving, I mean, there was just so much that was going on. And again, there's so much that we can't even really talk about, that just, you have to read the book, right?
Yeah.
But
so
that's where I think, yeah, sorry. Go on.
No, I apologize. I was going to say, so I just want to make sure, keeping us on track of time.
Sure.
So how many years ago was that towards now? I mean, 2023. How old is Carter now?
So it'll be 6 years this September. Kalen died. You got to remember, Carter was born October 6th. Kalen was born October 11th. Kalen died almost 3 weeks to the day before his 6th birthday. Wow. So he was 5 when he passed away. When Carter moved up here, shortly thereafter, we celebrated Carter's 8th birthday. So Carter will be 14 this October, and Kalen would have been 12 this year. Yeah, he died at the age of 5.
So, you know, I mean, I don't want to get into it because it's private and it's your personal life, but I imagine your son Carter, he's going through puberty now. He's 14 years old, and I'm sure he's maybe reflecting on the passing of his brother in a different light than maybe he did when it actually happened. I mean, these are things that are never fully go away. In the same way, it never fully goes away for you.
Well, and that's grief. Grief never goes away. We never fully get over anything. I don't think, and I hope I never do. Carter had a phenomenal therapist. I was able to get him one of the best in the area up here, and I'm happy to say that, you know, Carter's a well-adjusted, beautifully well-rounded young man, active in sports. He was the modified champion for pole vault and track this year.
Wow.
Plays soccer, carries a 98 average.
Wow.
You know, and the way we've done it is Kalen is interwoven in everything that we do in our lives. We talk about him every day. He has a box. I have a box. There are Kalen boxes. We have our sitting days where we know certain times of the year are harder for us. We celebrate his birthday.
Can you explain what you mean by the box, Kalen?
Okay, box? So I don't. I would run and get it, actually. And if you want to wait a minute, I'll go get it.
You know what? We can put a picture of it when we post.
Okay, I'll get you a picture. But mine is actually it's a little Tupperware shoebox. And inside it is my most cherished things of Kalen. So I have his first toothbrush. I have the pair of socks that he was wearing when he died. The newspaper articles. I have the roses from his funeral. I have his first tooth. Wow. I have some of his hair from when I got his hair cut. And I have a couple photos of him. And that's my Kalen box. And so Christmas or holidays, I have what's called a sitting day, which is the day before the holiday. Because I know on the day of the holiday, I got to function. So the day before, I pull out my box and I read the articles and I go through them and I cry and that's my time with my son. And I talk to him, and Carter has the same box that's filled with his own personal trinkets that are important to him of his brother. We have our Kalen shelf in our house where his ashes are, and his fidget spinners. And Carter actually just placed an action figure that he found in his closet up there that he was like, this was Kalen's favorite. I'm going to put it up there.
Wow.
And so really, yes, it's sad, and we grieve him all the time, but it has become really a beautifully joyous thing. We love talking about him, and we love laughing and sharing stories. And so Carter's grief is not a, I don't know how to word it. It's not grief in a sense. Yeah, we're sad, we cry, but we rejoice really in having had the honor of knowing him, because he was an absolutely remarkable young child. He really was.
And to add a little bit onto that too, I know we've this is an incredibly tragic series of events that happened, but the book ends in such a hopeful, positive light, really kind of highlighting Kalen's personality and just how he really was a source of light for others.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the reasons too why I wanted to reach out to have you on the podcast is
Did you lose Ron?
I lost. Oh, there he is. I do.
Go ahead, start over again, Ron. We lost your audio.
Okay. So I think one of the important things that happens in the book is there's this very positive kind of transition at the end. We're talking about Kalen being a positive force for the people that knew him. But then also, I think with what you've done with the book, with your actions, I want to talk about the forgiveness element. But Kalen has, through unfortunate circumstances, obviously, he's also gone on and made the world a better place, I think. Could we talk a little bit about that?
So that's the second part of the title, right? The lessons I've learned through the life and death. Kalen was the epitome and the embodiment of light. That kid hardly ever had a foul mood or, upset moment. He was quick with a joke. He had this smile and this energy about him. Everybody was his best friend. And I got to see life through his eyes, the amazement, the wonder, the pure innocence, and greens were greener and fish were bigger, and that endless imagination, and the fact that no matter how upset his brother made him or somebody, it only lasted a brief second. Anger wasn't in his repertoire. The grudges, things like that we know as adults, didn't exist. And so moving past his death, I realized that I wanted to be more like him. I wasn't going to hold on to the anger. I wasn't going to hold on to that. And the only way that I was going to get past it was forgiveness. And it's very important to understand that forgiveness is not about the other person. It's about yourself. It's saying you no longer have the power to choose or to dictate how I feel over an event, right? So if I stayed angry at Rodney or my ex-wife, that anger would always shadow over anything that was a memory of Kalen. They were literally robbing me of my memories. They had already taken my kid. I was not going to let that happen. And the best way I could do that was to say, you know what, that's on you. I forgive you. You live with it, not me. And then really looking at my life, what kind of man did I want my son to grow up to be? Carter. I had another son. I had to role model those behaviors. I also knew that I never wanted another parent to ever go through what I went through. Are they going to? Yes. So how can I better help them? Well, for starters, let's talk about it. Hence the book. Child fatality is such a taboo concept, right? We don't even have a word for it. if your guys' wives die, you're widowers.
Right.
If you guys died, they're widows. If our parents die, we're orphans. There's no word for a parent who loses a child. We need to talk about it more. And so I wanted people to know that they aren't alone. And the other piece was learning then, how can I go a step further? I was able to partner with an attorney, a friend of mine, Tina Bennett. And she is a father's rights attorney out of Syracuse. I now work with her advocating for fathers to have equal and shared time under the courts. I advocate for these dads to, really, what are we doing to foster that relationship between both parents and this child? How do we define the best interest of a child, right? Working with senators and looking at how does our CPS system function? How can we better protect these children? Because I talk about in the book, there were a lot of red flags brought to CPS's attention along the way, and probation and these departments that were just overlooked. So now, how can I champion that? How can I advocate for that change? I started my career working with the broken children. I started as a therapist at a residential children's facility. I became a CPS investigator. And it's become full circle, because now my job is, let's stop it. Let's really protect our children. And let's talk about these things, and let's get educated about them. And let's give a voice to those who maybe don't have the power to have that voice or the understanding. Family court is scary. Divorces are scary. And when you don't have the financial resources or the schooling, it's really scary. And I don't want anybody to feel that. I've been there. I've done it. There's an adage in recovery where, a man falls into a hole. Okay. And he's sitting in the hole and he's crying. God, I don't know how to get out of here. And then a priest walks by. And the priest looks down and goes, "Oh, my child, are you okay? I'm down here. I'm scared and I'm alone and I can't get out of this hole. Let's pray. All right, I'll be back in a little bit to see how you're doing." The priest walks away. A psychiatrist walks by. He sees the guy in the hole. And he says, "What's going on?" The guy is crying. "I'm all alone. I'm so alone right now, and it's so dark, and I don't know what to do." And the therapist throws his cards down and says, "Listen, call my office, and we'll set up an appointment for 2 weeks." Right? Man sits there a little longer. All of a sudden, another man walks by. He says, "Hey, how are you doing? What's going on? What's going on?" He says, I've lost my way. I'm down in this hole. It's dark. It's lonely. I'm getting cold. I don't know how to get out. No one will help me. All of a sudden, the man jumps in the hole. He says, "What the hell are you doing?" The guy looks at him and says, "Listen, I've been here before. I'm going to show you how to get out." That's where I am today. I've been there. I want to help people get out of there. I've been in the darkest recesses that humanity has to offer, the nastiest of the nasty, and the only way you get there is through hellfire, baptism by inferno. So if I can help somebody else suffer a little less, then really that's the legacy I want to leave, because Kalen loved everybody. Kalen never wanted anybody to suffer. He was, as I said just a minute ago, the embodiment of pure light.
Oh. Well, and what a role model for Carter.
Absolutely.
So I do want to, and I know we're running out of time, but, for anyone listening, not only should they check this book out, but, I think for me, listening to your story, there's a lot to take from it. But, we went into father's rights a couple times. And I think that's something that you don't really think about unless you're in that situation, unless you're in a situation where there's a divorce or there's a separation, there's something that occurs. And I don't think we talk about it collectively.
We don't.
Especially with how many divorces there are in this country. So for anyone listening, and we have a small but loyal listening base, and they're all over the country. So, and I know every state's different, but I know you're helping where you can. For someone listening, how can they get involved? What do you recommend? How can they support this movement?
So, there are movements in every state now. There's fathers' rights advocacy groups, wonderful grassroots movement. So you could literally just Google it, and you could find a chapter where you are. Being part of that, getting the word out there, I think is a great way to help. Getting familiar with things, dads groups, getting involved with those things and really making it, better understood, is a great way to get involved in the advocacy. You can always look us up on YouTube. It's eCourt Coach Consultants. I've got tons of videos there. They're free.
And we'll link to that.
How to file a petition, how to choose an attorney, how to know what your rights are, because most of it's pretty universal state to state. Just some of the penal sections and the social service law changes a little bit. There's that. So you can get involved, with your local groups. Volunteer. Get out there and just be present. And again, what a great way to role model for your own kid, being involved and giving yourself something to do. But I mean, that's really how dads and men can start to really change the narrative, right? That not all men are deadbeat dads. They're not all going to go get the milk and never come home. Learn what the laws are in your state when looking at support and, divorce and, just being there for your fellow man, literally.
Yeah. Well, Tim, with that, an incredible story, an incredible journey. We're so appreciative that not only did you take the time to speak with us tonight, but you wrote a book about it. So yes. I know we've talked about it, but where can people find this book? Where can people locate it? Where can people purchase it?
So to make it easy, it's online. And actually you can buy it at Barnes & Noble online. You can get it via Amazon. You can get it via Walmart. You can get it via Thrifty Reader. Anywhere you can buy a book, you can get this book. Or you can go directly to the publisher. It's nfbpublishing.com. I think it's .com or .org. I'll have to look. But NFB Publishing out of Buffalo is the publishing company that took on, I signed the contract with. So you can get it directly from them. Amazon's usually the quickest. People I have found get it, and within 2 days or same day, they have the book there. It's also available in Kindle form.
Wonderful. Tim, again, thank you so very much. Meaningful story, but stories like this need to be heard. They need to be shared. And so we're glad that you did.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. With that concludes this episode of Between Two Studs. Thank you again.